Good morning, class. I thought I'd give a brief lecture here about the midterm essay that's going to be coming up soon. It's going to be basically your essay 3. If you remember, essay 2 is due tonight. I sent out some information. Meant to send this out a little earlier than I did with everything going on with that move from the flood and everything I had to experience and being sort of under the weather with lingering head cold. I apologize, but I think when you go back and look at the announcement slash the email about citing um, your song for your particular rhetorical analysis, it should be really easy to do. You just have to go back and actually create parenthetical citations, meaning you're probably going to have to count your own lines because you're going to quote lyrics as you would poetry. Um, if you took most of you had to take 11th or 12th grade high school English class. At some point, you had to quote poetry, I'm sure, using MLA, where you had to count the lines if the line numbers wasn't, provided for you. And you would have to put those in the parentheses at the end, right? If you look at the actual web page that it takes you to, it shows you how to do that. And you would want to also create, because you are using a source because you're quoting from your lyrics, you also have to create a work cited page. And in this case, since you're only using one song, I'm assuming you're just using one song, it will be work, not works. You only use works if you have more than one work that you're actually quoting from. In this case, you should only be quoting from one song. It should be on a separate page from the rest of your essay, meaning if your essay is 3 or 4 pages, you end on page 4, the works cited page would be on page 5. So you have to skip down to that next full blank page to create your works cited page. Don't smash everything together on page 4 or whatever when you're ending. Now, we're going to talk about the midterm essay. I did send out some information about that last week, how to go about approaching it. This particular essay will be a timed essay, meaning everybody only has 60 minutes. You're going to have to download that Respondus LockDown Browser app. I gave information about how to go about finding that. I double check. I'll go through and show you where you can find it on this particular video as well. There's a lot of things attached to it. There's handouts, there's videos, there's lip guides. I'm not going to go through all that because you have time to go through and watch and click and read and do all what you need to do. For most online courses, you're going to have to do a Respondus, some kind of Respondus event, whether it's a midterm, whether it's a final, whether it's quizzes. You may have to do it for everything that you do as it relates to online, depending on your instructor. Usually I have it around midterm. It just makes things a little easier for me. It also makes it maybe a little helpful for you. So, most of your final exams may be on Respondus. So instead of having another exam toward the end of the semester, we just do the Respondus deal and get it out of the way midterm. It is a one and done particular essay, meaning you cannot have a rough draft. You can't send me a rough draft. You can't send Smart Thinking a rough draft. You have to do this one and done in one setting. You type it in one setting. Once you hit start or click begin or whatever it asks you to click to get started, the 60-minute timer is already rolling. What you would need besides the Respondus LockDown Browser, obviously you're going to need stable internet connection. I can't help it. If the wind starts blowing really bad one day and it knocks off your internet connection while taking the test, I mean, you only have one shot at this. I can't keep going back, restarting it or deleting your response because you didn't finish or your internet connection was dropped, 4 minutes into the exam or whatever the case may be, because the college pays for these for each individual person. And you usually do these only if you're strictly 100% online, which this course is strictly 100% online. What you can bring and what you can use is a essay outline. I'd recommend that you outline your essay. The topics are already up there. We'll look at the particular topic. It's in the actual modular 3. It's been open for a while, so there's a reading that's attached to it. We will go through the reading a little bit, but ultimately it's going to be your responsibility to really read the Stephen King essay and, maybe take your own notes, create your own outline based on what you have read from the Stephen King piece, so you can use that in your actual essay outline. You can have note cards. You can use basically anything but having a pre-written rough draft, because when you go in there, besides, needing the respondus, because there's going to be somebody on the other end, not me, but there's going to be somebody on the other end that's going to be watching you and proctoring you during this particular essay exam. You're going to need a Coastal Pine student ID or a driver's license, something that has your picture, a current picture, and your first and last name that they can actually see, right? You don't want to pull it up there and it's blurry. If they can't see it, or if we can't see it, you may not be able to take the exam. So make sure things are clear. Make sure you do have your web mic turned on during the duration of the exam. If we can't see you, then the exam is basically going to be, avoided. It's going to be counted as a 0, because we got to see your face. We got to make sure that the person that's on the other side of the camera is also the person, first and last name, on the driver's license type in this particular exam. You need to have a web mic as well, in case you need to communicate. Make sure you don't have a lot of people running in and out of your room. You want to be in a clear, clean, and noise-free area. The proctor could flag you for having people walking in and out, just talking casually. They don't know what you're talking about. They can only hear bits and pieces. But if it sounds like it's something suspicious, like you're getting help, because we've had students, hide under the table when it comes to, taking math proctors, and, pass notes or whisper answers, that type deal. If they feel like you're cheating, or if you got a lot of stuff on the wall that you're looking back, or your eyes are just wandering all over the place, they're going to flag it. It's going to be recorded. I'm going to look at it. If it looks suspicious to me, I'm just going to give you a 0 and move on. Not playing the games, when it comes to this. I got, too many other classes. A couple of other ones are doing Respondus. So, I mean, it's going to be recorded. And again, I mean, if you don't have your camera on, if it's black throughout the whole time because you just cover it up or whatever, I'm just going to give you a 0, move on too, because I'm not playing the games of, people bypassing the system just to get started. And then now all of a sudden, there's tall tale signs. I can tell if somebody is kind of cheating on this thing. If you've basically what I'm looking for, if you look at the instructions, and we will look at these momentarily, I'm because of the time constraint, I know you're not going to be able to write like a 4 or 5 page paper, and I don't expect you to write a 4 or 5 page paper. I do expect you to have probably a 5, like basically what you would have a 5 paragraph essay: introduction, 3 body paragraphs, and a conclusion. That usually goes, roughly about 2 pages. Now, once you get into the lockdown browser, it's going to lock you down, meaning you can't go anywhere else in the course. You can't surf the net. You can't even use Microsoft Word. There's going to be a box for you to type your essay. Mimic the essay format like you did for essay 1 and essay 2 as much as possible, meaning it may be difficult for you to do a double space. It may be difficult for you to do indentions. I understand that, but as long as I have some sort of a order and organization going on, you should be okay. There is spell check in that particular box, but you're going to have to, excuse me, you're going to have to mind your own grammar, meaning you're going to have to use your own head when it comes to figuring out Do I have a comma splice here? If so, how do I figure, how do I fix that? It doesn't have a grammar check, so you're going to have to grammar check on your own. So getting back to the point when I was talking about, if you get on there and because most folks, including me, I mean, I'm not going to be able to sit down 5 paragraphs and type that thing out in 20 minutes. Um, so you're probably going to need at least 40 minutes, depending on how fast you write or type, think, that type deal. Most people need 40 minutes. So if you're turning something in 15 minutes in, or you're turning something in 25 minutes in, I know you probably already had a pre-written draft hidden around somewhere. So utilize the time. You're probably going to need the 40 minutes, even with a really good outline and note cards. Now, if you don't bring those, again, that's optional. It's going to give you like a environmental 360 view that basically going to want you to use your camera to look around your area to make sure you don't have anything additional that you don't need. I would, say in the camera, I'm able to use an essay outline and note cards, and show them that. So there's no issues as you move along. Um, but I would definitely use about 40 minutes to type. I'd probably use about 10 minutes to proofread, edit, spell, grammar check, and then use the other 10 minutes to sort of fine tune anything that you need to fine tune to make sure that it's saved and that it properly is uploaded. Because again, you're not going to be able to use any kind of Microsoft Word or any kind of, Google Docs once you get locked into that browser. So let's turn our attention to the actual instructions here. And I'm going to share my page. And then we're going to look at this Stephen King piece. Give you sort of like a general overview of the Stephen King piece. You should be able to see what I'm seeing, which is basically the information about your essay 3. I did send out a web link that sort of, I don't know what's going on usually with the transfer from one semester to the other using simple syllabus. The web links seem to be working 2 or 3 weeks ago. And for whatever reason now, it's wanting to say they're dead when they're not. But I did send out a corrected web link via announcements and email last week, but also I went ahead and fixed the web link that was also here. If you click on it, it should take you to that particular page. So it should be working. Or you can always do a Google search of Why We Crave Horror Movies by Stephen King and go about finding a copy that way. I'm not really, particular about you have to use only this specific copy. If you can find it somewhere else and it's clearer and cleaner, I mean, use that one. Um, I don't care because I mean we're not dealing with like a anthology textbook where sometimes you have professors you have to only use this one because of the page numbers and all that. Because I'm doing hyperlinks here, not really worried so much about that. So here's I basically give you, I say double space times New Roman 12. Again, if you can mimic that, do that to the best of your ability, because I realize you're going to have to type this thing in the text box. You're not going to have the capability to do the Microsoft Word. Now, if you were in person, an in-person class, you would have that ability. And you would definitely have to follow, and I would be grading the format a little bit more stricter. But since you're strictly online and really don't have that option because you're locked down, I'm not going to take off so much for the format as long as it seems clean, it goes in order, right? You have an introduction, thesis statement, 3 body paragraphs, conclusion. You do have your first and last name somewhere that I can see that, who's typing this thing, that type deal. You can mimic a lot of stuff in that text box. But I wouldn't freak out and worry too much because you're just not going to have the time, being that you're only having 60 minutes once you hit start. I do say the link to the 4 pages. I mean, again, depending on how fast you type and think, how well your outline and note card is, I would say most folks usually get about 2 pages. And that's usually what I'm looking for when you're dealing with this time constraint. Um, Half a page is not going to do you too well. A page, depending on how well you really answer the question, depending on the topic here, probably won't do you that well too well either. I would definitely try to go 2 pages. If you can go more than that and have time, great. But I would definitely try to follow that format because usually, an introduction, 3 body paragraphs, and a conclusion within a time format, usually it yields about 2 pages. 500, 1,000 words. When you're thinking about, if you're double spacing this, 250 words per page. So 500 words would be that 2 pages. 1,000 words would be closer to the 4 pages. So again, it all really depends on how well you type, how well you prepare your outline coming into it, and note cards if you plan on using those. But again, what I'm really looking at is probably about a 2-page essay here. The overview, right? So here's sort of the prompt. In Why We Crave Horror Movies, Stephen King explores why audiences are drawn to frightening and disturbing films, right? I think a lot of us like horror films, especially, in today's modern, you know, film stuff that, we crave a little bit more. Some of us may like to read the horror books before going to see the actual horror movies, or maybe vice versa. Um, Rather than dismissing horror as mindless entertainment, King argues that these movies serve important psychological and social functions. His essay combines humor, observation, and provocation to challenge common assumptions about fear, morality, and human nature. For this assignment, you will write a response essay that engages directly with King's ideas. So you're writing a response piece. Um, and yes, it will do you good if you actually read the King piece, because otherwise you probably are not going to know how to respond to it properly. Your task is not merely to summarize his essay. Again, I'm not looking for a summary of his essay, because I can find summaries of his essays all through Google. Not looking for a summary. I already have too many of those. But to respond thoughtfully to his claims by agreeing, disagreeing, or partially agreeing, and explain why. So if you look down, right, the writing task, write a response essay in which you evaluate Stephen King's main arguments and why we crave horror movies. Your essay should demonstrate a clear understanding of King's central claims. And again, we're going to go through some of his essay here and look at some of the paragraphs. Respond correctly to at least one of his key ideas. Support your response with specific references to the essay. So you may want to go ahead and either, on your note cards or somewhere on your outline, as you read his particular essay, pick out particular quotes that you want to use to support your claims. And, look at the page numbers, because I gave you the information about how to cite. You're going to be, citing page numbers instead of line numbers in this case, because you're not doing a song or poetry. And you probably would need a works cited page because you are quoting. So you might want to go ahead and, you could put the quotations that you want to use on your note cards. You can go ahead and kind of type up or write out how that works cited page should look. So you can just sort of copy and paste it while you're typing. That way you're not rushing to figure out, hey, how do you do this, that type deal? Because again, once you're locked in, you're not going to be able to go surf the internet. Explain your reasoning clearly and logically within the 60-minute time frame. Again, I am keeping in mind you do have 60 minutes. We're basically using this exercise to see how well you can think and write and type and process information under a time constraint. Because you think in the real world, you're going to have time constraints. You're going to have time constraints at your job. You're going to have time constraints in your household. How well can you prepare and think on your feet with X amount of resources at your disposal. You may agree with King, disagree with him, or acknowledge both strengths and limitations in his argument. So again, kind of keep in mind, here's the guidelines. This is a response. It's not a rhetorical analysis, right? Essay 2 is the rhetorical analysis. This is a response essay. Limit summary to one short paragraph or less. Again, I don't need summary of his essay. I'm going to basically sort of talk through here momentarily with a lecture on his particular essay. I already have a summary of that going through, right? And this is not a summary. Focus on your reasoning and interpretation rather than personal anecdotes, right? Your response should engage with ideas, not just reactions. And I give you some guided questions to sort of help you as you prepare to outline your essay. You can use these selectively. You don't need to answer all of these questions, but this could be a really good starting point, especially after you read his essay fully and take some of your own notes on particular passages. What does King believe horror movies reveal about human nature? Which part of King's argument do you find most convincing or questionable? Does King successfully justify why people enjoy being scared? Are there assumptions in King's essay that deserve challenge? And how relevant to King's ideas feel to modern audiences? So those are some key questions that you can kind of answer as you start filling out your note cards and your outline. Now, again, this is in modular 3. This would be, you'd click here. It's going to look different on your end. Again, when you click there, if you haven't downloaded the Respondus LockDown Browser, it's going to prompt you to do so. And as in a prior email, you can find all that information here. If you go up to Welcome Stingray, click here to start, scroll down to the bottom, and you find information here, both Lockdown Browser and Monitor. This will walk you through which one you need to download. You might want to look at all of this stuff if this is your first time. This is a LibGuide that the library has put together. It's going to be important that you download the proper lockdown browser app to your device, meaning if you're using a Chromebook, you need to read this and follow the steps. If you're using Windows, you need to read this and follow the steps. If you're using Mac, you need to use this and follow those steps. You can't mix and match, meaning you can't have a Chromebook and download the lockdown Respondus browser for the Mac. It's not going to work. There's going to be a mismatch there. And basically what it's going to do, and this is what I have to kind of tell all my classes each time, if it prompts you for a password, don't email me for the password. I don't know it. I didn't create one. I don't have the password. The program sort of makes up a password each time somebody clicks on it. And the problem with that is if you download the right app to your device, it's going to bypass that whole deal and go right into, let me see your ID, let me get a, picture of you, blah, blah, blah. So if you're doing everything right on your end, it's going to automatically bypass that password because it's already built in. So emailing me, hey, what's the password? I can't get in because it's that. Well, good luck with that because I don't know it either. And I don't. So I'm just going to tell you, hey, you probably downloaded, which sounds to me, downloaded the wrong lockdown browser to your device, and you need to, delete that one and download the right one. Because otherwise, that's the only reason why I would ask for a password. The other thing is, if you need information or help with Respondus, you may need to click here and get in touch with their people on their end. The only thing I have with Respondus is sort of creating and uploading the exam, which we just talked about the topic. I have no control over what happens on your end or your part of it. So if your computer is acting wonky, if you're having internet connection issues, if the web mic is not working, that's all on your end. If you did everything right and read through all this stuff, it should be a really easy, seamless process of getting to the exam. Now, what I would suggest is if you don't think you're going to have great internet, right? If you don't really have a web mic or a cam, you can go to your closest Coastal Pines Technical College and you can utilize their equipment. You can utilize their computers, but keep in mind it's most campuses, well, all campuses are pretty much open only Monday through Thursday, 7:30 to 6. Um, so this would have to be done during business hours of the college if you plan on using their equipment. So kind of keep that in mind. Um, if you're using your equipment at home and everything works, keep in mind you do have the ability to take this thing at 8, 9 o'clock at night, all the way up until the due date. Now, I did send out an email across the board, and it's not just for my class, but it's for all of classes now. They're wanting to keep all our deadlines within the Monday through Thursday time frame between 7:30 and 6. The reason that is in case, especially for online students, if you need to reach out to your instructor because you're having an issue with the exam or something, you can contact us because most of us work the 10-hour days, Monday through Thursday, 7:30 a.m. to 6 p.m. So they're wanting to eliminate the whole Friday, Saturday, and Sunday deadlines because some instructors, once they go home at 6 o'clock on Thursday, won't check anything or grade anything until they come back Monday because technically that's our days off. Friday, Saturday, and Sunday are our days off. That's not to say I won't read emails and stuff like that, but they want this to be across the board, so it's kind of out of my hands. Um, the powers that be want that, so that's how that has to be. So moving forward, most things are going to be due by 6 o'clock, Monday through Thursday, right? There's not going to be any other Friday, Saturday, or Sunday deal. You're just going to have to get it in by the respected deadline during the week. Let's look at the king piece a little bit. And then I'm going to sort of go from there. So if we look at the first paragraph, right, this is really where it starts to see here if I can highlight some stuff, if it'll let me. We get really the thesis, right? We are all mentally ill. So if you think here, I think that we are all mentally ill, right? So King opens with a bold, humorous claim that everyone is a little crazy, right? Because we like these types of movies, these horror movies. He lists everyday quirks, talking to ourselves, odd facial expressions, irrational fears to show that insanity exists on a spectrum. So, and we see that within this first paragraph, right? If we look at some of the hook strategies that he uses shock, he uses humor, exaggeration, right? He's sort of within this first paragraph establishing his tone, introducing a thesis indirectly, because usually when we talk about essay 1 and essay 2, we want to have that thesis statement toward the last sentence, or really it needs to be last sentence of the introduction paragraph, but here he sort of brings it out first. This is more or less like a creative essay piece, because again, it is Stephen King, right? We see this dichotomy between normal versus abnormal behavior within this particular paragraph as well. So some things that you can kind of think about why you start reading this first paragraph is why start an essay with such an extreme claim? How does King's humor soften this provocation here? When we look at paragraph 2, right? How horror as a dare. And that's basically what we're getting at. We have horror as a dare here. King argues that we watch horror movies to dare the nightmare, right? Why do we want to dare the nightmare? Like he says here, daring the nightmare. When we pay our $4 or $5, of course, this was back during Sting or King's days. It's not $4 or $5 to go to the theater anymore, as we know. And seat ourselves at the 10th row center in the theater showing a horror movie, we are daring the nightmare. And then he gives that sort of rhetorical question, right? Why? And then he goes, I mean, it's not really necessarily rhetorical because he kind of goes and answers it, right? Um, but it's in some ways for him, it's a test of courage, right? We're testing our courage here. Motivation for consuming the horror, right? We can kind of focus on fear as entertainment. Some folks go to these movies for the fear to as entertainment. The fear is acting as entertainment for them, and the psychological of thrill seeking. So another question you can kind of ask yourself right while reading this second paragraph is, why do people enjoy being scared in control environments? Right? Paragraph 3 talks about this roller coaster metaphor, the twists and the turns and the speed. If you like riding roller coasters, or if you've been on roller coasters, you can kind of use this same, like he does here, the same metaphor and apply it to horror movies. King compares horror movies to roller coasters, thrilling, surprising, especially appealing to the young, right? Uh, when we look at this particular paragraph, he's using metaphor and analogy. He's using these two things, the film, the roller coaster, a thrill ride, or horror movie. The audience appeal, youth versus the adults. We have more of a physical or emotional thrills going on when we look at this particular paragraph. One angle that you can kind of take away and maybe ask this particular question when looking at paragraph 3 is, how does the roller coaster metaphor help explain horror appeal, right? What's the appeal to the horror by him using this roller coaster metaphor? Does it work well? Paragraph 4 looks at normality, as we see here. It's reaffirming normality. So horror movies reassure us that we are normal compared to the monsters on screen, right? At least that's what he says. Um, King calls horror innately conservative. And we see that right here. The horror movie is innately conservative, even reactionary. So what does that mean? Well, if we look at this particular paragraph and focus on the social norms that it talks about, right? It also sort of enhances beauty standards. And we look at a particular, he gives a particular movie in question, or uses as an example, Die Monster Die, confirms for us that no matter how far we may be removed from the beauty of a Robert Redford or a Diana Ross, we are still light years from the true ugliness. So we also might want to look at how horror reinforces rather than challenges normality. And one angle from this particular paragraph you can kind of look at question-wise to see if you can answer is, why does seeing extreme ugliness make us feel better about ourselves? Why do we like to see the gross and all of that ugliness when it comes to some of these horror movies? What are we trying to run away from something, from ourselves, maybe deep down? Um, Do we see ourselves in the mirror differently than the ones that are on screen that are mutilated or disfigured in some ways? Do we feel better about ourselves in that way? Something you have to kind of think about. Paragraph 5, really short. We go to have fun, right? We go with our friends, family members, by ourselves sometimes. Usually it's best to see a horror movie when you go with a group of people, right? Especially with some of the jump scares and stuff like that. So what King does here is that he transitions to the idea that horror is fun, but a strange kind of fun, fun based on watching others suffer. Somehow we have a little bit of pleasure, even though we know it's a film, most of us do. Um, there's some guilty pleasure of going to see Final Destination and seeing somebody getting hit with the log coming off the back of the log truck and going through uh, the glass of somebody's car who, you know, if I remember that scene right, he's smoking weed. He's like, pretty much all out of his blitz already. He really gets all out of blitz when that log hits him and decapitates his head. Um, Leading up to that, we just, going through the different vignettes that we see of that particular character, you can already see that most of the audience probably doesn't like this guy. And maybe they're hoping he's the first one to go. So what paragraph 5 does, it gives us a really good transition from the first 4 paragraphs to really the last half of this essay. There is a tone shift. If you read the first 4 paragraphs and then start looking at paragraphs 6, 7, and 8, we see that shift in tone. The ethics of entertainment, we start to get a little bit more mindful of. And then one particular angle to take, or one particular question to ask and see if you can answer is it morally troubling that we enjoy watching fictional characters suffering? Um, there's got to be a reason why we go to see these things. And it's not the continually, because like I said, he talks about them being $4 or $5. Well, yeah, that was back in the 70s and 80s, but now we're 2026 and movies are not $4 or $5 anymore. So you got to think of that too, the price of going to a movie. If we're going to be shelling out $20 to go see this newest horror movie, got to be more than just the money because we can take that $20 and put it somewhere else, right? If we look at paragraph 6, he starts talking a little bit about horror as a fairy tale. King argues that horror films simplify the world into black and white. Like fairy tales, they allow us to abandon adult rationality. And that's where he starts, he talks about here, this is where the ground starts to slope away. Um, right. Horror film has become the modern version of the public lynching. And we get into this particular fairy tale horror film. That starts, in this case, I guess, paragraph 7 on this particular form. Um, we start to look at the degrees, the matter degrees of insanity, right? When we look at paragraph 8. So going back to paragraph 7 real quick, we look at the archetype types of different films and different stories as it relates to fairy tales. We have this fairy tale structure, regression to childlike thinking, right? Um, it says a fairy tale horror film intends to take away the shades of gray. It urges us to put away our more civilized and adult self, right, for analysis and to become children again. Seeing things in black and white. That's pretty interesting how he says that these things make us basically back into children to see things black and white. I don't know if I'd really agree with that, but maybe. Um, I guess you could see horror films as a black and white. I think there's a little bit more to it than that, but we'll see what you think when you do your essay three here. One angle that you can kind of look at is why do people sometimes want stories without moral complexity? And I guess the real reason behind that would be there's already a lot of moral complexity in the world. We go to films, whether it's horror films, action films, cartoon, anime films, to escape our own reality, right, for 2, 3 hours, to be social, to be with family, to be with friends, to be with strangers. Because a lot of times, besides taking family and friends, you're still in a theater full of strangers. You're not going to know everybody there. Um, and maybe a peace of mind, maybe taking that $20 to go and seeing that flick will take you out of your comfort zone, will make you forget about the worries of your life, at least for 2 hours. You can see other folks suffering and having maybe similar problems like you are having. Hopefully, you're not living a real life horror film, but you're in a position where you can kind of take the stress off just a tad and watch other folks have to deal with other particular types of moral complexity than what you have to deal with. When we look at paragraph 8, and he talks about this degrees of insanity, King really extends his thesis. Everyone is insane, but society tolerates mild forms and punishes extreme ones, is basically what he's getting at here. Um, and he says that we are all insane. The sanity becomes a matter of degree. If your insanity leads you to carve up women like Jack the Ripper or the Cleveland torso murderer, we clap you away in the funny farm. But neither of these two amateur night surgeons was ever caught. He, he, he. If, on the other hand, your insanity leads you only to talk to yourself when you're under stress or to pick your nose or on your morning bus, then you are left alone to go about your business. Though it is doubtful that you will ever be invited to the best parties, right? Something about folks talking to themselves. Uh, Even now, people still say, "What's up with this person? He's a little off." But sometimes, I mean, kind of keep in mind, sometimes the best conversations you may have will be talking to yourself driving and coming back from work. You're able to process things a little bit better. And sometimes you just don't have the time to sit down and write when you're driving, right? So you have to express it. You have to say it out loud sometimes. Um, so some focus here on this particular paragraph, social definitions of sanity, right? He goes through several different types of sanity here, and he focuses on those. He mixes humor with dark subject matter, and then the spectrum concept gets called into play here. And we see here too, it says love, friendship, loyalty, kindness. These are all the emotions that we applaud. Emotions that have been immortalized in the couplets of Hallmark cards. And in the verses, I don't dare call them poetry. And he gives, Leonard Nimoy uh, as an example. The potential lyncher in all of us, right? He talks a little bit about that in the next paragraph. King claims that the violent impulses exist in everyone and must be let loose occasionally. So he sort of focuses on in this paragraph taboo impulses, Catharsis theory, human aggression. One question to pretty much ask is King right that everyone has violent impulses? We start looking further into the paragraphs. We have the emotional muscles. King compares emotions to muscles that need exercise. Society rewards civilized emotions by suppressed darker ones. We have the metaphor emotions as muscles, and he talks about it here. Um, Paragraph 10 talks about the positive reinforcements. We learn this even before we get out of diapers, when as children we hug our rotten little puke of a sister and give her a kiss. All the aunts and uncles smile, twit, and cry. Isn't he the sweetest little thing? But it moves on to anti-civilization emotions. Don't go away. They demand periodic exercises. We have such sick jokes as what the difference between a truckload of bowling balls and a truckload of dead babies. You can't unload a truckload of bowling balls with a pitchfork. A joke, by the way, that I heard originally from a 10-year-old. So again, he gets into more of this social conditioning, the reinforcement theory, right? One question that's sort of asked in this particular paragraph is what emotions does society encourage and which does it suppress, right? We get to the very end of these paragraphs, childhood conditioning, right? King uses a childhood example. Hugging your sister earns praise, hurting her earns punishment. We talked a little bit about that. He uses an anecdote as evidence. Social learning theory, he gets a little bit more in depth into reinforcement versus the punishment. And then we can come up with this particular question that possibly needs to be answered throughout. How does childhood shape our emotional behaviors as adults? The sick joke and shared insanity. King uses a shocking dead baby joke, as we looked at here, dead babies, to illustrate the dark humor, appeal to something universal and taboo. There's a shock value when it comes to this particular paragraph, audience discomfort, why King uses disturbing examples. And again, we have this particular question of why do people laugh at jokes they know are wrong, right? And we do that all the time, sometimes without even knowing it. Horror's dirty job, right? He talks about horror having a dirty job here. The mythic horror movie, like The Sick Joke, has a dirty job to do. So King will argue that horror films deliberately appeal to our worst instincts. He uses the metaphor of feeding raw meat to alligators beneath a trap door. And we see that. For myself, I like to see the most aggressive of them. Dawn of the Dead, for instance, right? He uses an example, a movie example, as lifting a trap door, right, in the civilized lower brain and throwing a basket of raw meat to the hungry alligators swimming around in that subterranean river beneath, right? The final sort of paragraphs talk about this justification for horror. King concludes that horror keeps our darker impulses contained. He referenced Lennon and McCarthy's All You Need Is Love. Adding the love works only if we keep the gators fed. So he's using some of, back in a little bit of pulp culture during his time. All you need is love, right? As long as you keep the gators fed. That was his final justification here. So we look at some of the conclusion strategies that he uses. He's using the irony. He's blending pulp culture with the argument, right? He mentions couple singers songs. Um, our takeaway really is King's final message optimistic or cynical? All right. What say you? Now, these particular study questions that might be on some of your copies, you can kind of use those as guides to kind of help you maybe outline your paper. You don't necessarily have to answer them and turn something in because I'm not going to grade them. They're just there for you to sort of go through if you want to go through and use those. I will let that be up to you, but you don't necessarily have to answer them. It could help you though when it comes to um, outlining your paper. So that's pretty much that essay. Again, you probably want to go back and read it a few more times to mark some stuff up like I did and make your own notes. But I think once you read it a few times and you digest what you really want to talk about, coming up with an essay outline for this particular topic um, shouldn't be that difficult because, again, it's a response essay. It's not a rhetorical analysis. It's not a narrative descriptive. It's a response essay to King's particular view of why we crave horror movies. Do you agree with him? Do you disagree with him? Are you sort of on the fence where you can see half of his points yay and half of his points nay? Um, Respond to it. Um, don't just summarize. Don't give me everything that King just says back at me in your own words. Do a little bit of thinking here because, again, think of it this way. Why? I mean, think of it in your own sense. Why do we crave horror movies? Or why do you crave horror movies? Might be another way to sort of approach the question. And do you agree or disagree with King's assessment? All right. I'm going to leave it there because the lecture is about 60 minutes, which is usually about how long a class lecture would be. So let me know if you have any further questions or issues. See if I can help you out. Um, and I hope you have a good rest of your week and good luck as it relates to SA2 and the upcoming midterm. And I will talk to you soon. Have a good one.